All right, we have the envious position of being the last talk before the bar here. But we're going to make it worth your while here. So first of all, thank you so much to Madeline and the Magento team. Let's give them a quick round of applause here. Anybody who's ever run an event before, my hat's off. Anything that allows Josh and myself to come up here, do our thing, go. It's been fantastic. So thank you so much for having us. Again, really want to take the spirit of a fireside chat here with Josh and kind of close things out on some next step and maybe some ideas on how you can get started with the essentially the brand new shopping experience of Magento. So by way of introductions, Josh, you want to go ahead and anybody here not know Josh?
Hey. All right. So I am Joshua Warren, founder and CEO of Creativity, and also I am chairman of the board of the Magento Association. So would love to talk to any and all of y'all about both of those things at the party tonight. So.
Absolutely. And so for those who don't know me, my name is Erway. I'm the senior manager for product management of our merchant experiences, which include Page Builder, PWA. And so really, again, the genesis of this conversation, it really is a conversation sparked about 6 months ago. Josh and I were talking just before Imagine around some of the early examples and some of the early workings of PWA Studio at the state and the time. And his team had a lot of good news and had a lot of experience from a developer, a partner, and a merchant experience. And we were excited to talk to him. And so a lot of folks that saw some of the work there that was shared there, and they continue to keep rolling with some of the work that we've done and we have planned, for the upcoming 2.3.3 release and then beyond for that. And so the spirit was really just the beginning of that conversation, but also to build on some of the points that Yissa had brought up at Meet Magento, which was really around the spirit of experimentation, the idea of taking this new technology, stop waiting for it, and really start to play around with it. And so. So with that, how are things going? How's with regard to the partner experience? How things have been going with PWA?
Yeah, they've been going great. So we've been involved through kind of the community engineering standpoint as well, and we love. I was talking to a couple of people earlier about how the PWA roadmap being public and having so much community input around that has been very, very helpful, and we're excited to have. 2 different PWA projects underway, with more coming, but 2 that we're planning on having launched before the holidays. So.
Yep. That's great to hear. I mean, the biggest questions we often get are like, where do we get started? And, are there any of these live examples that are out there? And so I think Josh and team continue to do good work in that area. We work with them on a pretty regular basis on some of these and work with others as well. Again, a lot of it building upon the great work we have foundationally with the platform, but again, evolving that with, things like the GraphQL coverage that's coming each release. But then as we extend in some of the new areas of PWA Studio around the Peregrine components, the Venya storefronts, and other aspects that have been really great. So Josh, question for you. So from a merchant perspective, what are you hearing the most from prospective merchants? I know you're doing a lot and talking a lot to customers about this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of early results from just PWAs in general around the performance improvements and the performance improvements that are turning into conversion rate improvements. At the end of the day, merchants care about, am I going to sell more? Am I going to make more money? And we're definitely seeing that with what we're doing around PWAs, and that's getting merchants excited. The other thing is it reminds me a bit, and I don't know if this is I'm curious to see how the crowd reacts to this one, but it reminds me a little bit of conversations I had with merchants right after Magento 2 was released, and conversations of, okay, do I want to invest a lot of money in making improvements to my Magento 1 site, or do I want to go ahead and move to Magento 2 relatively early, make that investment onto that platform, not add features to M1, things like that? We're having similar conversations of, okay, this is the future of the front-end experience, so does it make sense to put a lot of money into, say, migrating to Magento 2 now to a non-PWA, knowing that, okay, in a year or 2, I'm going to put a lot of money into then moving to a PWA. So we have some great merchants that kind of understand that and realize that for their use cases especially, they're a lot better off just going straight to the PWA.
Yep. No, we're hearing a lot of the same thing as well. So we talk to roughly 2-3 customers or partners per week, the PWA team, much of which is still busy at work in our Austin office, about half an hour from here. And we hear the same thing. And one of the answers that we don't like to give is that it depends, right? And so it depends is it's not very satisfying, right? But the reality is it really does depend. It depends on customizations. It depends on an iterative approach. It depends on your teams. Developer experience is a big part of where James Etlin and team started off on this journey 2 years ago. And so introducing this idea of a React-based front end, we didn't invent PWA, we didn't invent React. Taking these off-the-shelf best practices and these tools have been a big part of what we've been working with the teams on, and that spirit of experimentation where people have that question when they come to some of our weekly meetings, when they start to play around and maybe even start their first PR, has been a big part of that adoption. So with kind of the developer experience in mind, and what was probably a pretty developer-heavy audience here, what have you heard from your developers on it so far?
Yeah, I mean, they love that it is React-based. They love that it's GraphQL-based,
Yep.
like being standardized on those technologies. They're so glad it's not XML. I think we're all a little tired of XML at this point. But yeah, that's been great. And then also just the architecture behind it. Like, we focus so much on the front-end experience, but the way the architecture is broken out through GraphQL, it is so much easier. Like the work we did around Page Builder, the work we did around Magento Order Manager, integrating in PayPal and Braintree, like those things were a lot simpler than we thought they would be, in large part due to the way it's architected. So.
No, absolutely. And that was, I think, some of the really impressive things that we saw 6 months ago, where we know on our roadmap we will have order management integration for PWA. We will, quite soon be looking at page builder integration for PWA. We know that these pieces have to come together in a meaningful way. But, because it has been easy to extend for some of these earlier adopters, and we see this time and time again, if you've spent any time on our Slack channels, folks like Jordan Eisenberger and others are wiring up, local payment methods in a short amount of time. Other partners are looking at things like ratings and reviews fairly quickly with other partners. And so that's been really promising for us. And so as we start to evaluate and look at our first case studies in terms of overall total cost of ownership and overall maintenance, it's been a big factor of that. So those kind of out of the box, kind of, not invented here. We're just using things that make the most sense. We're putting some opinions around it to make build, optimize, and deploy much easier. But it's been a really good experience. So in terms of the kind of the partner experience, I know we started off with some of this. What else are you hearing from other partners? What are some of the key questions and some of the things that are on people's minds from a partner standpoint?
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions that I've heard, typical to a lot of new technologies, it's just like, should we be working on this? Is it ready? Is it time? And I do think that it's time to. You should already be learning it. You should already be experimenting with it. It's not necessarily something you should deploy on every project yet, but it is something that you should be deep into. And I think that there's a lot of people. It's interesting. I talk to the tech leads, and they get it, and they're like, "I'm pushing my agency to do this." And then I talk to the business leads, and they're like, "Yeah, but it's not billable," or "We're doing research and R&D," and they get a little nervous about it. But I think those that embrace it and get out ahead of it, not only is there just going to be a massive amount of demand around PWA, I know that all the work Magento is doing, and then all the work Google's doing as well to point people in that direction, but also the sooner you get in front of it, I really feel like it's going to lower our costs around front-end development. I think it's going to make it substantially easier to find front-end developers to work on projects. Like, I think there's a lot of aspects on the business side for agencies that I don't think people are fully comprehending yet.
No, I agree. I mean, I think one of the things that we try to be really sensitive to is around the marketing around PWA as a whole. Again, it is a standard. It's not necessarily a product in its own right. And so, it's hard to, based on the audiences, really kind of talk through what those might be. I think Google as a partner has been really a great partner of ours to help us kind of think through, evangelize, and start to model what we can expect out of these technologies. But I think, one of the big changes between, I would say, even 6 months ago to today is really moving away from that why PWA to kind of like what and when. And it's very clear when we talk to people here at the conference, we talk to customers and partners, if they've begun to start working with React, if begin to start working with GraphQL, very quickly you can tell that, because you can see kind of that guard drop and go, okay, I see where it is now. I see what I need to do, and I think I can start to look at this as a near-term launch for my store, whether they're on Magento 1 or they're looking at it as kind of a next step from their Magento 2. So that's been really encouraging. So is that have you heard pretty much the same?
Yeah. Basically along those lines, and I think it's even getting to the merchants more. It's becoming an easier conversation with merchants.
Yep.
There's still not full comprehension necessarily around what PWA means,
Yep.
but I think knowing that that's where our industry is going
Yep.
is becoming a lot more common. And I think one of the big things for both agencies and merchants is to realize that you don't have to make this your main site. There
Right.
are ways you can experiment. So of the 2 projects we have launching later this year, one of them, they're going to use it as a subdomain. They're going to use it for very specific events and situations,
Right.
whereas the other one is going to launch it as their main site. And so
Yep.
that's definitely an option as you look at what PWA Studio can do today versus a month from now, 3 months from now,
Yep.
and figuring out ways to fit it in your roadmap that way.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, as we look at some of the different permutations of PWA, we talk to to partners and merchants alike on what that might look like. And getting started means different things for folks. And so, imagine this, from a scoping standpoint, just being a flash sale. So, talking through a scenario that goes from the homepage maybe to a product details page through a simplified checkout that could, in theory, run independently of your existing store. You can look at things like A/B testing and others to begin to kind of dip your toe into what this looks like, dip your toe into actually understanding what those results might be based on the promise that we're seeing from other stores and other sites that are out there. I think again, being encouraged, I think, from some of the things that we heard at Meet Magento New York last week, like. What we're doing is really about making these tools and making this experiences much easier for the developers to get this going and making those costs lower. It's not that we're necessarily first to market for that. We're really proud of that from a team standpoint. The first service worker was done by Tom Robertshaw, 2 years ago, right? And so that can be done on a variety of platforms, but it's way more than that. And so I think as you look at those pre-post types of comparisons, PWA is just a small part of it, and so that's why user experience and how you start to craft what that looks like. Is really a key part of that. It's enabling though and unlocking some of those experiences that were once reserved for native, but making those available for web. So that was a really nice learning, and I think a lot of good takeaways from last week.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the exciting thing about PWA for me is that we're barely scratching the surface. Native notifications. I've been doing some experimentation around the payment request API and some interesting stuff you can do around in-person payments with PWA. So there's so much more. Like I feel like it's a topic, responsive was a big topic for a number of years, but it kind of peaked and then it was like, okay, everyone's responsive now. I feel like PWA has such a long roadmap of things we can do, functionality we can add to match and exceed the native app experience.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the ways that we've looked at it is PWA, in terms of what it means for us, is enabled by 2 major things. One is the GraphQL coverage. Obviously, that's our next generation API for everything that we're doing. We are, committed, and we've got a very strong and large team in collaboration with the community on getting that together as quickly as possible, right? And so that is the foray to that. But the other part is unlocking those browser capabilities. Again, I think, and one of the things I've been really happy about with our Google collaboration is getting some exposure to some of those key experiences and APIs that we will see that we can start to unlock with this, namely, more recently, things like the context API. So think about those B2B cases where you start to get access to things that were, again, once reserved for just aspects of your phone that are now available to the web. So they're really liberating things that were once there. That is pretty encouraging, and we continue to see good examples like that. Good examples of device capabilities that can quickly read and scan QR codes that you used to have to wrap in an app. So that's been encouraging. So still waiting for push notifications. I actually sent a note to Apple about that last week, but we're working on that. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely have to say, so I'm a big Apple user, but Google is definitely leading the charge around PWA support more so. But I know that Apple will get there and is moving there. So I think everyone sees that it's the future of the web and the future of the user experience. So
yeah, there was a big update this weekend. So with some of the Apple press, there was a web version of Apple Music that came out that was based on web components, and so a lot of the skeptics are starting to say, wait a minute, maybe they're starting to open things up a little bit in terms of their push to go beyond native as part of it. So we're encouraged by that. We'll continue to track, but again, I think as a collective community, we can be more than one voice as part of that. And so I think there's some really interesting use cases around push notifications, especially when it comes to fulfillment, delivery, much more than just kind of the marketing. That's great. That works extremely well for Android. If you have to do it, you can still use solutions like PhoneGap and Cordova to get there. But we want it to be one code base. We want it to be much cleaner than that. So that this is a great opportunity for us to push that. So kind of from a user experience standpoint, we talk a little bit about some of those opportunities here. I know you've got a strong team from creativity. What else are you starting to think about from an experience standpoint, taking advantage of P2A and some of these near-term opportunities, or just as a whole?
So I'm really interested in omni-channel and in the way PWAs can be used in the store experience.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of interesting things around in the store experience, not just the user and the customer, but also the store associate, and kind of having one unified system through the PWA that whether it's a customer coming in and they want to place an order for ship to home, or if it's a store associate that is pulling someone's order to ship it to their home, being able to do all that through a PWA and through your Magento code base. I think that's going to be an interesting possibility. I know there's a lot around point of sale as well, but we're also moving to a world where Amazon has stores that you just walk out of. So it's like, okay, are there ways for us to use a PWA POS that the customer themselves picks their items, checks out, walks out? So I think that I don't know. It's an exciting time because we're right there on the forefront of where the web is going, where the shopping experience is going, and we're able to influence it in a way that I feel like as an agency or even as a platform and as a community we haven't been able to do in the past. So that's been exciting.
No, absolutely. I think if we look at our strategy and kind of how we look at PWA as well, we're equally encouraged. And again, we're joined here with the bulk of the UX team here. Sami is our designer and has been doing some great work extending where we started off with Venya, but also paying really close attention to the experience of the developer. So thinking about some of the new scaffolding work that James and team is thinking about, the idea around a uninterrupted or less interrupted workflow when it means making a small change to a page and being able to quickly see it without having to worry about the cache. And so again, not necessarily things we've invented. If you're a front-end developer, we are opening the doors to some front-end developers for the very first time who are starting to look at Magento as well, but looking and taking great care of the experience regardless of kind of who they are across that, but ultimately heading towards a world where P2A is it's just going to be the way the web works. It's going to be the way that the front end for Magento works over time. So it's pretty exciting. So switching gears again, kind of thinking about the future of P2A. So we kind of talk about this, and we see a lot of data from Forrester and Gartner about this. This being really 75%, and mobile just being 75% of the potential for all traffic. From your standpoint, where do you see P2A going?
Yeah, I think that PWA is basically the future of where commerce is going to go. I think that every year, more and more commerce is conducted online, and every year, more and more of the online commerce happens on mobile. You put those two things together, and it points straight towards PWA. So I think that's definitely a big part of it. And I think that what I've noticed with what Google is doing is I feel like they're also trying to think 1, 3, 4, 5 years ahead and say, okay, what sort of shopping experiences can we enable through creating new APIs, creating new functionalities in PWA?
Yep, absolutely. And I think a big part of that is also measuring as well. And we look at things like Lighthouse, but also the user experience report, and also their equivalents. There's others tracking this as well. I think understanding the measurement from certainly a business standpoint, but performance as being a key part of that. There's a lot of standardization, and I think a lot of understanding of this that I think even in your current stores, even if they're not PWA, understanding where you are right now helps you chart that, but also helps you chart that in a step-by-step way. It doesn't necessarily have to be a re-platform, using either the studio or other aspects of that as well. So, well, good. So one of the things that we almost never do at these panels is make any time for questions for this. And so I'd love to kind of kick it to the audience here. We've got a pretty full attendance here. What kind of questions do we have around PWA? Yep. All right. Sure.
So in order to make our extensions compatible with PWA, do they have to have GraphQL endpoints?
Yes. No. Hey. So GraphQL is going to be the key to extensibility. So if James were here, and James was here last year and did a great job at a more technical fireside chat with TJ on this, and we continue to work with the marketplace team and we work with partners on understanding what quote unquote extensibility means, right? So first of all, it starts with being able to pull down PW Studio in a meaningful way that doesn't require you to clone something from GitHub. And so we continue to see that as feedback, and we've got some great things happening here in a couple weeks to make that better. But as an extension, and again, Yissa did a nice job with this. GraphQL is a big part of that, and so making sure that that is really how that compatibility and that extension is centered is going to be key to that. And so again, would encourage some experimentation there. Keep us honest if there's any questions you have about it, but it's going to ride upon the GraphQL that exists today, and then essentially the marked improvement that we're going to be making with every release, including even 2.3.3 coming out here very soon. So.
And then also just as an agency, I would say that whether you're thinking about PWA or not for your extension, if I see an extension that has GraphQL coverage in it, then I'm going to be more likely to recommend that one, whether the client's on PWA or not, just because it's going to be a little bit easier to work with, a little bit easier to test, things like that. So I think that even if you don't want to go full blown, okay, I'm going to do everything I can to support PWA Studio, start moving your extensions towards GraphQL for sure.
And on the flip side, we know that GraphQL coverage isn't 100% complete. And so, and even if you look at the example that we have today, there are ways to do this using REST, and it's actually, it's pretty manageable from that as well. But it will be a GraphQL first approach to what we're doing, and that includes extensions. So, good question. Oh, question from Yessa. We got. Wait, hold on. Is it? Wait, is it good?
Actually, for you, Josh. So you mentioned various Magento projects that are currently using PWA Studio to be used as a base. Are these merchants coming from Magento 1? Or are they Magento 2 merchants now flipping to PWA?
So the very first PWA Studio project we did, they were already on Magento 2, but the two that we have in the works now are both migrating from Magento 1. And the exciting and interesting part for me is one of them is a open source merchant, and one of them is a merchant moving from open source to Commerce Cloud. So it's giving us an interesting array of kind of testing possibilities, pushing the platform a little bit where needed, that sort of thing.
And I think building upon that, there are probably about a half dozen or so active developments that we're aware of in the work. Some of them we'll find out a week before they launch. Some of them we're helping along the way as part of kind of our process as well. And so those also fit the same profile that Josh described as well. And so I think there's a commonality there.
How about the checkout and the payment process? I think, is there only one payment gateway that's supported right now, or are we doing a hybrid approach to that?
Yes. No. I'm trying to be. I've been coached to be brief. Currently Braintree is the default gateway, but we do have plans and aspirations to grow that. So for us, it was more turnkey. We looked at it from a developer experience standpoint. Rob's not paying me on that one, but for us, it looked at it strictly from a developer experience standpoint, being able to wire that up with a configuration file. But there are plans to expand that. Same thing with shipping and tax as well. So, and there's also with 2.3.2, there's a lot of GraphQL coverage that came by way of checkout that we still need to realize with the Venia storefront and the new Peregrine components that will support it.
I will say, Rob, cover your ears. Our first PWA project, Authorize.net was their requirement, and it was not that challenging to integrate. Braintree's great, but the way it was built, it wasn't too bad to add Authorize.net support.
And the other option is to do a hybrid approach where you could have checkout on regular. You could push.
Yeah,
you could.
That could be a fallback, right? I mean, it's certainly an opportunity. And there's another example or two that I've heard as well. Again, Rob, close your ears. That localization, adding additional payment methods, and that is applied to other extensions as well. Has been somewhat manageable. The idea of using this and extending using GraphQL. React. With this has actually been it's somewhat manageable. Customization is going to be different as you know it, and that's going to be a good thing.
Well, and maybe adding to that, close your ears, Rob, is that there's numerous payment providers.
Rob's going to join us on stage here in a second, and there's going to be a discussion. Yeah.
So,
Drinks last night.
yeah, exactly. No, I just wanted to point out that there's actually numerous other payment providers already working on Node solutions, and that's leading to React components that could be used. And well, whatever is based on Node or whatever is based on React is easily integratable in PWA Studio again.
Yep.
Yeah, and along those lines, we talk a lot about PWA Studio, but I think, and I like what Eric pointed out earlier, this is just a standard. PWA is a standard, and by supporting this standard, as there's other companies out there doing interesting things with PWA, it's so much easier to pull it into a Magento project now versus, back in the day when it was all a very custom front-end experience and a custom way of putting together a front end. So.
It's probably important to note that for those who haven't seen the breakdown, there's a lot of good documentation. When we described PWA Studio in the first meeting with teams, there are so many different pieces to that. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. It's more than just Venya. It's more than just Studio. It's more than just the components and that. So I encourage you to take a look at it and follow up if you have questions.
Can I ask about Vue Storefront?
Sure, go for it.
So there is sort of this there is sort of a separation right now in the community, or some people are going this way and some people are going that way. And as I understand it, there's nothing really we can share between the two, other than they're both JavaScript.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time with the Vue Storefront team last week. So they had a Meet PWA event last Wednesday. James and Philip and team, they sat down, and I think we have a lot of mutual respect for what they've done and how they've done it. I think it's a great project. It solves a lot of needs. It is a different stack though. So ultimately, as we look to, and again, Yissi had a great talk last week about it, where we do have to start thinking about how this can all work together in a world where if you're an extension developer, how do you even begin to support this? Certainly things like GraphQL and other commonalities will be okay, but there will be a fork in the road for that. And so we're encouraged by it. They're doing some interesting things. There are some key differences in kind of how they're positioning it from a whole marketing and business standpoint. But we're encouraged. We really enjoyed spending time with them last week. So it's a little bit different. But yes.
And from my perspective, I have a lot of respect for the Vue project, for Deity, for these different initiatives. But for us, I like to stay as close to core as possible. I feel like projects that build around Magento core tend to be less expensive to maintain, easier to deploy new Magento features to. So that's why we kind of made the decision. I made the decision and defended it to our team, basically, that we would use PWA Studio. So.
Hey guys, first of all, this fireplace video is really setting the mood, so I appreciate that. We got time. So Josh, other than payments, I was curious if there's any third-party software extensions that y'all pulled in for the projects you've worked on.
So one of the first extensions to support GraphQL that we pulled in was Shipper HQ. And that's been great, being able to use that. We haven't done a lot else, again, because these first projects, I'm trying to stick as close to core as possible. So. Oh, let Brent have one last one, then we're cutting you off. So.
How about, do you see it going more towards microservices then, rather than some of the functionality built into Magento and building a microservice on top of Magento using PWA?
Yes.
Yes. No, I full disclosure. I would encourage someone like Zetland to actually walk through that in the detail and the rigor it deserves. But essentially, we, from a product standpoint, see PWA as a useful step in our overall headless approach. Right? It's about opening things up. It's about democratizing pieces of the product. We of course intend to provide a community and a product that will work extremely well and how all this hangs together. But from a technical standpoint, that is multi-year, that's the direction we're going from this. And so, pay special attention to not only, again, what we're doing on the Venya storefront side, but think about the components and some of the things that we're doing to really start to break down key aspects of the storefront experience. And that is, beginning to tell the tale on how we're breaking other parts as well. So.
Yeah, and I spend a lot of my time trying to guess and figure out where Magento is going as a community, as a platform, and just as a whole. And kind of reading between the lines of a lot of the shifts I've seen, I think microservices is where, not just for the front end, but I'm seeing the whole platform kind of move towards. Obviously, don't know for sure that's where we're going, but from an outsider's unofficial viewpoint, I feel like that's the direction it's going, and is towards more microservices.
I think at Meet Magento Germany, they talked about splitting it into segments at least. Instead of just microservices, they're going to split up into smaller services.
Yeah. Services, just slightly larger services. Yeah. And I think.
What about if you have the right now site launch in the PWA Studio and the new version is launched, then how we can tackle that things? Is it okay, or how it will work?
So that's a lot about it has a lot to do with the extensibility story that James and team are working feverishly on with regard to the upcoming 4.0.0 release. And so that's going to be paired with 2.3.3. Again, we are an open book for better or for worse. You can see what that looks like. But the idea of using a single command, almost the way that Composer works, to pull down and really manage some of those dependencies. That's where we're right now. And so we understand some of the first forays into what we're doing. There was a little bit of hand holding, a little bit of work to kind of keep up. I mean, we're still using React, we're still using the basics here, but we're really sensitive to anything that breaks with the versions that we continue to introduce. And so that will get better. That's going to be part of that 4.0.0 release that is coming up very soon, and that'll be done as a traditional NPM kind of beginning that you would expect.
Yeah, and it's in the earlier days, and we're still in the early days, but in the earlier days, there's definitely some breakage with PWA Studio updates as the architecture was kind of settling down. That breakage is happening less and less and less often, and I do think that 4.0 release is where we'll see that finally, maybe not stop for good, but really stabilize a lot more. So it's a really good time to start a PWA Studio project, is either now or as that 4.0 release comes out.
Hey, actually, I can introduce a little bit more insight regarding the microservices stuff, and actually in Magento.
We have an architect. Thank you.
Yeah. My name is Igor. I'm lead architect of Magento. So actually, we don't call them microservices because there are not a lot of things in Magento which are really micro. So we call them isolated services. And actually, regarding the statement that we split in the platform, so this is really correct statement. So the Magento as an application, as you know it right now, actually literally consists of two different kind of application: the backend part and the storefront part. So we know that you are struggling with our upgrade upgrading to the new releases of Magento. And one of the reasons for those struggling is that we are trying to evolve the system, introduce more API, introduce more decoupling of our modules, and so on and so forth. So that we decided that we will not be proceeding with that way, and we will just make a brand new system, and we will go into the kind of a greenfield development of the new storefront system. And we already started to do it. So the first client was the PWA, which communicate via the GraphQL, and underneath of the GraphQL, we started to build the storefront API layer, and that front API layer is supposed to communicate via the new ORM style with a different database adapter, probably mostly Elasticsearch. So that this is, you can consider it as a new system, which currently developed alongside with the existing monolith. And this is especially address the issues or address the requirement for the big enterprise merchant, because big enterprise merchant already have some e-commerce infrastructure, some ERP, product information management system, customer relationship management system, and so on and so forth. So they actually no need our Magento admin panel, which we have right now. And they're really interested in our pretty much flexible Magento storefront. So that this is one of the point of the separation of the two different applications. The storefront application and the store management application. And actually the storefront application will consist from the isolated services. So the main idea here is to provide the ability to substitute these services. So for example, if the merchant has the ERP system, it would be really easy to substitute our order management part or inventory management with this system. Because currently our modules contain both admin part and the storefront part. So it's not just easily, for example, to switch off our inventory management or order management part, because it's all currently bundled under the roof of one module. So here how we proceed with the separation of the storefront and the store management. And another thing that the requirements for scalability is totally different. Because, for example, if you consider the read-write ratio, for the storefront system, it would be probably like 99:1, like 99% of read and 1% for write, while for the store management part, it would be totally different. Because in store management, we have much more write scenarios, and so that we're supposed to have different kind of APIs. So what we are considering right now that Magento would be released as a two applications. With of course we're supposed to provide still scenario when the Magento would be deployed as a monolith, and we are not trying to eliminate this scenario. So probably, especially for the mid-market, it would be the most usable scenario of deployment. And but for those merchants who trying to whose business is growing, who have more requirements for scalability, they may scale storefront independently out of the store management. And this is actually how we consider the separation of two systems. So this is pretty much all.
And that is a good example of why PWA isn't just something for front-end devs to stay on top of, because it is a good indicator of where the whole platform is going. And with that, we are over time, and I do not want to keep y'all from the drinks. We will be at it's Brazos House. So we will be at Brazos Hall. Brazos House was a dorm at my college. Wow, that's a flashback. So we'll be at Brazos Hall, so if y'all have questions, want to keep this conversation going, we'll be there. You can also find us on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. So welcome your questions.